Junction Community Church, we're back to our routine message series. And for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking through this idea of routine. And what we're discussing and discovering is the value and the priority of life's routines. And sometimes the word routine can take on such a mundane expression, right? Going through the routine of the day, the routine of life. But also routines can take on this very exciting expression, this very exciting idea. For example, a great workout routine is nothing mundane, right? And also any other routines that you can think of life can often be very exciting and exhilarating. But ultimately, routines help us become better in life. And so for the past couple of weeks, we've been digging into this message series. And it comes at a great time because right now we're getting back into the routines of school, back into the routines of sports. I know there was a lot of football happening yesterday, right? Yeah. It's okay. You can act like you acted yesterday on the field. We got the routines of football back in effect, right? Yeah, because I know you weren't that subdued when those touchdowns were scored yesterday. And so back into the routines of sports and football and all of those things, and ultimately we're back into the routine of church. And what we began to see is that in the fall routine, as life goes back to somewhat of whatever normal is, we tend to get back to school and other activities, and then certainly church becomes one of those things that we prioritize in the fall season. And I'm excited about all that God is doing around our lives here at Junction Community Church, because He really is stirring up something great inside of us. Now, last week we walked and through the challenging topic of navigating through life's financial routines. Man, that's a difficult one. Navigating through life's financial routines is absolutely can be just quite chaotic, right? And we don't have to. We can all just know that there are moments in our lives. There are moments where all of a sudden we realize that financially there's just a lot we're up against, and so kind of walking through those waters can be really difficult at times. But it was a lot of information last week. But here's my prayer. My prayer is that it was helpful for you, that it was helpful for your family. And as your pastor, I said last week, and I'll say it again today, I'm not trying to get something from you. I'm trying to get something for you. And because I know that as you walk in God's plans when it comes to finances, that He's going to take care of you, that He's going to bless you, He's going to give you peace, He's going to give you reassurance. Even in a state of feeling chaotic, He's absolutely going to bring you peace and blessings. In fact, our takeaway from last week was this: routinely managing money God's way leads to peace and blessings. Financial peace sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. You can absolutely have financial peace as you manage money God's way. And so routinely managing money God's way leads to peace and to blessings. And ultimately, as we're blessed to be a blessing. And so God wants to certainly bless us in the way that He moves in our hearts and moves in our lives so that we can be a blessing to others. And that happens in so many ways. It's not just financially, but it's in every way possible. And with our words, with the generosity of our words, with the generosity of our lives. And I just want to say once again and reiterate that I am so grateful for every one of you that calls JCC home, that operates in generosity financially towards the church. God is doing some great things through our church. In fact, yesterday this house was filled with individuals that were receiving food and clothing. I know that at one point I heard the count was that we ministered to 55 families through Sarah's Pantry yesterday alone. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people that are being fed and clothed right here through your generosity. And so I just want you to know that I am so grateful to see what God is not only doing in us, but what God is doing through us. And it happens through our generosity. And so again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now this morning we're going to explore another important and valuable routine. In every area of life, we encounter, ready for it, relationships. We encounter relationships. In every area of life, at work, at home, at play, in every area of life, we are going to have to interact with other people. And sometimes that's a great joy, and at other times it's an immense difficulty, right? Let's be honest. And we don't like to admit it, but sometimes we're just like, man, we walk into church and we put on the face like everything's okay, but we know not everything is okay. And relationally, there's some strain and some difficulty, and And ultimately, we need to realize that relationships are a blessing, and we've got to work through those in a biblical fashion. And so, whether it's at home, work, or play, again, we interact with people on a daily basis. There's no greater way in our faith journey to see us develop and grow than by interacting with other people who have the same mindset that we do, have the same values that we do. And that's what we do as we operate in the context of church, because there's no greater way for us to grow our faith than in the context of life-giving relationships. Now, here at Junction Community Church, we just wrapped up 21 days of prayer. And I'm going to ask, guys, can you turn these lights all the way up if they're not on the front, please? These dimmable lights. It's a little dark in here, maybe. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I've been in this building too much this week. But 21 days of, they're the ones on the wall, the dimmer switches. Thank you so much. And so, or maybe these are too bright. That's what it is. It's blinding me. I'm not sure what's going on. Forgive me. I'm just a technical. I get too distracted by technical things. And so, anyhow, 21 days of prayer. We just wrapped up these amazing 21 days of prayer. And it has been amazing walking through those 21 days. But this last week, what we discovered was our values. And if you look around this building, we have 6 values that are highlighted in this building. And we highlight them because ultimately we will act and interact by what we value. And so these values are important to us: mission and compassion and service and worship and growth and community. And as we walk through and live out these values as a church, they're so very important. And one of the things that I want to really talk about today is the value of community. Because our value of community is ultimately something that we live out every day in our personal lives, in our collective lives as we operate as a church, but ultimately community is important. And there are layers and layers that I can talk about community, but here's what I know about community is that every one of us is born into community. We're born into relationships. Like, we cannot be born and at 0 days old go off on our own and do our own thing, right? It just doesn't work that way. Like, we're, in fact, early on in our lives, we're in immense need of our community. Like, if we're not fed, if we're not clothed, if we're not taken care of, we will not make it, right? Can you imagine if we were just kind of like left to fend for ourselves as children? That would be chaotic. That would be devastating. That would be life-threatening, you know? And even as our kids age, we still think that's life-threatening, you know? Like, don't leave them alone. You know, what's going to happen? And so, anyhow, Dante, Jacqueline, something you guys have to look forward to as you'll be new parents coming up, man. Well, high five about that. Exciting. But, yeah, it's a great, we need our community. It's so important. And at Junction Community Church, we have what we call an Acts 2020 vision of community. Acts 2020, it's a verse that we're going to look at. And really, we all have heard of 2020 vision. You know, I had LASIK surgery not too many years ago. You know, I'm only 21, and so it was just a few years ago. I had LASIK surgery. They're laughing because Josh is older than me. But anyway, so here's the thing, by a couple months anyway. So here's the thing. I had LASIK surgery. I couldn't see before I had LASIK surgery. I was like, man, I'm 2020. But then a couple of years ago, I was standing on stage, and I was like preaching, and I started to realize faces were fuzzy again. And I was like, nah, man, you know, all that money and time invested into surgery, and I should be, you know, fine. But nope, I went to go see the doctor, and he says, yeah, you can't see again. So I said, all right, I'm not going to do LASIK this time. I'll just do glasses. It helps me look smarter anyway. So 2020 vision. But in Acts 20, verse 20, we read this. It says, you know that I have not hesitated to preach anything that would be helpful to you, but have taught you publicly and from house to house. And so in this verse, it's really what I would describe as an Acts 2020 vision. It gives us clarity about the community that God has invited us to be a part of. And so this is the Apostle Paul, and he's sharing this, and he's really talking about his interactions with the church. Again, he says, you know that I've not hesitated to preach anything that would be helpful to you, but have taught you in 2 places, publicly and from house to house. And so he begins to emphasize this large group setting and also this small group setting. It's so important for us to see the value of both. In fact, to this morning, we're a part of a large group gathering, and I love getting together on Sunday mornings. Because when we get together on Sunday mornings, we really are able to worship together in a corporate setting. We're able to hear great messages. We're able to let God work in our hearts and let God work in our lives. And it's a unique experience that we experience collectively. It's something that we see not only in this verse, we encounter something that we see throughout what's called the early church or the book of Acts. We see this emphasis on public gatherings and then small group, more private gatherings. In fact, I want to read two more verses. In Acts chapter 2, verse 46, it says, every day they continued to meet together in temple courts, in other words, in public setting, and they broke bread in their where? Homes. And ate together with glad and sincere hearts. There's this emphasis again on this public gathering where they come to the temple courts and they would gather together in a public setting, but they would also gather and break bread in their homes. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of life, right, is breaking bread. Eating. Y'all with me? I like to eat. I like to eat good food. And so I'm already thinking about lunch this afternoon. And so I'm thinking about dinner tonight. I'm thinking about breakfast tomorrow. No, okay. But the bottom line is this, is that they gathered in the temple courts, but they also gathered in their homes. They broke bread. They interacted with one another. They had these family gatherings. And in Acts 5:42, we see it reiterated. It says, day after day, in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. And so as we understand the value of community and we look at it from a biblical standpoint, we see that there was an emphasis on both the large group gathering and the small group gathering, that it wasn't either or, it was and, both. It was together, that they worked hand in hand, that the large group gathering was wed with the small group gathering, and the small group gathering was wed with the large group gathering. There was an emphasis on both. There was a need for both. And so we see that played out again in Acts 2:42, in Acts 5:42. And again, we get it from this idea of an Acts 20:20 vision coming from the book of Acts chapter 20. Now, I've often said that the large group gathering is where the whole extended family gets together. When we get together on Sunday morning, it's like a family reunion. We get together, you get to hang out, you get to see cousins you haven't seen for a while, you get to see family members that you didn't know were family members, and you're like, hey, we're family. Even if you're visiting from the Denver area, it's like we're family. And we know that in this gathering, there's a lot of people. We may not know them by name. We don't know their stories. We don't know exactly what may be going on in their lives. But what we do know and what we have in common is that as believers in Christ, we are indeed family. Again, from no matter what our background is, where we live, where we interact, where we work, none of those things matter. We are family. And so it's like the large family gathering. In fact, have you ever been to a family reunion and you meet people and you're like, man, I didn't know I had family that were that looked like that acted like that something like that, right? You come into a place where you meet family and for the very first time, and you're like, man, I didn't even know that I had family in that part of the country. I didn't even know that I had family that was that was that close to me, for that matter. And we go through our lives, and a lot of times I'll run into people that have the same last name as me. In fact, I've ran into people here in Grand Junction who have the same last name as me, and oftentimes people will say, I'm from this part of the world, or I'm from this part of the country, and there's like no relation. And then there's this, my last name is Espinoza, by the way, Espinoza with the Z, and so there is a lot of people that will, have that same last name, but then there's a select group of people that will say, hey, and I have family that's from the San Luis Valley. And then at that point that there's some connection. But like when you research, it's like, wait, who's your grandparents? Okay, great-grandparents. Okay, great-great-grandparents. Okay, great-great-great-grandparents, And the interesting thing about that is that you really won't find that there's a direct relation, but you're related. And so we just call each other cousins. We're like, hey, what up, cousin? Like, I don't know how we're related, but we are. We don't really say cousin, we say primo. It's a Spanish term for cousin, and so it's like, hey, primo, and it's like we're not really related, but we are. You get what I'm saying? And so it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that experience. In fact, what's interesting about my family dynamic, just a side note here, is that my great-great-great-grandfather, his name was Pedro Espinoza. And Pedro Espinoza lived in the San Luis Valley, my great-great-great-grandfather. And so my family has been a part of southern Colorado, northern New Mexico area for a long time. Since before, it feels like since before there was time, but it's not that long ago. But it's for the last couple, probably 100 years, and you're like, wow, man, that's some heritage, that's some deep tradition. And people say, when I travel to other countries, they always ask me this. They say, especially Latin-speaking or Spanish-speaking countries, they say, hey, are you Latino, are you Hispanic? And I'm like, yes, I am. And they say, well, what country are you from? And I'll be like, no, I'm from the United States. Yeah, I know that. But, like, where are you from? And I'm like, yeah, I'm from the United States. You know what I'm saying? Like, and they're like, no, I don't get it, though. Like, what country are you from? I'm like, okay, I don't know how to. You ever heard of the state of Colorado? Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic. But ultimately, again, when we get together on Sunday mornings, it's like a big family reunion. We're from all different walks and all different backgrounds in all different parts of the country or neighborhoods in our community, whatever it is, but we are family. We're family. And so it's like a big family reunion. It's a celebration of corporate worship. We learn from God's word together. We're inspired to live out our faith. And yet in contrast, there's also the small group gathering. And the small group gathering is like getting around our family dinner table. It's a little bit different. In fact, for me, my favorite time of the day is when I get to have dinner with my family. That's my favorite time of the day, hands down. It is definitely the moment for me that everything else is set aside. My phone doesn't ring. Well, it still rings and it still buzzes, but I put it away. And if anybody has a phone at our dinner table, they about to get smacked upside the head. No, we don't do that. Just kidding. But we don't have phones at the table. We don't do that. We just they're away. And for that time that we're sitting around the dinner table, we are completely tuned into one another. And what we're doing is we're picking up where we left off. What was the day like? What happened in your world today? What went on in your life today? And oftentimes, and I've shared this many times, we share a daily highlight. We want to know, what was the best part of your day? Because here's what I know about life. It's easy for us to focus on the negatives, right? It's easy. You can have 10,000 compliments on your way into work, about how good you look or great you smell or smart you are or whatever it is. You can have all these, but if one person says, hey, what's wrong with your hair? Oh, game over. Every compliment just went out the window, and you got to go fix your hair. You got to go get your hair did. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like everything positive that was said is all of a sudden is like, it's like, man, what happened? Did and the bottom line is it's easy to focus on negatives. Let's be honest, You wake up today and you got a lot of exciting things, but there's that one thing that you're kind of dreading, and that's the thing that's on the forefront of your mind. That's the thing you're focused on. That's the thing you're obsessing about. Children, how many of you love parenting? Parents, we love it, right? It's awesome. Parenting is amazing, and we get some great things that happen, like our kids just knocking it out the park, high five yesterday in some football. Yeah. 48-0, baby. That's what happens, right? 5th grade Chiefs football. Yeah. 48-zip. That's what happens. Those are great things. But we can get hung up on the one thing that didn't happen. What do you mean you didn't brush your teeth this morning? Don't you know everybody's going to know about that? We get hung up on some crazy stuff, right? We're like, man, and really we tend to focus on the negative. So in our home, at dinner time, we have a daily highlight. What was the best part of your day? And oftentimes, the best part of our day turns into just the story of the day. I did this, and I did that, and I did, and this was great. And the common thing would just be like, well, school was awesome. And so I always probe for more information. So like, yeah, that's great. School's good. Tell me something specific about school. Well, math class. Well, what about math class? Well, I loved this in math and my teacher or one of my friends. Because again, we want to live in the context of community. And so it's not only this big group gathering of a family reunion, but it's the small group gathering. And it's likened just to our immediate families. It's so critical and so important for us to understand that the two are important. And so it's in those moments of gathering around a dinner table or a living room that we have the most meaningful interactions of our lives, right? It really is. And when it comes to the church, we also have to realize that this large group gathering of community is a great thing, but we've got to scale it back to the small group setting, because ultimately the Bible even likens us to a family. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5, we read this. It says, God decided in advance to adopt us into his own what? Family. He's adopted us. We're a part of his family. God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. Like, this is what God wanted to do. And the verbiage is interesting. It says, this is what God wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. Like, this was something that, you ever just do something and you just get such joy out of it? You just get such peace and excitement and fulfillment out of it. You're like, man, I love that. That's just such a fulfilling experience or moment in my life. Well, when God brought us together and adopted us into his family, it brought pleasure to him. Like it says here that this is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. It brought peace to him, and it brought joy to him. And if we're to take on and imagine his emotions, that all of the joy and all of the excitement of bringing us together brought this peace and pleasure to him, because he wanted us to be a family. And so as we biblically look through this idea of community, we've got to understand we're a family. But in the context of family, we've also realized that there's layers of connection. There's the large group gathering, and there's the small group gathering. There's the time where we get together, and this is awesome. Like, we get together and we do this. I love when I'm able to participate and not be on stage. Not because I don't want to do this. I love doing this. This is a great honor and a great privilege. But sometimes it's nice just to be kind of like one of just sitting in and like, man, I want to hear what gets to be said today. And then, just processing that and allowing God to nurture my own heart with that. So I love the large group gathering, but there's nothing, again, like the small group gathering. And so for us, we accomplish both these things as a church. And I want to talk through those things for a few minutes here. I want to really kind of dig into the nuts and bolts of those two things. While the large group gathering is pretty obvious, but it kind of sometimes goes without saying, but it's what we would call our weekend services. It's when we gather together on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock or at 10:30. It's this environment where we come, and how many of you just appreciate our worship team? I appreciate this team week in and week out. They minister before us. They lead us in worship. They lead us in praise. And I love to see as the group changes and the dynamics change from different individuals are a part of that. I love to see that just the different people that are on this team. In fact, Christian, I'm not trying to call you out, dude, but where is Christian? Now I'm calling him out, huh? So I just saw him a second. Christian, like, he's brand new to the drums. He's been learning over a season, but this is probably only his like fourth or fifth time playing in a service. And dude, that's awesome, man. Like, I would try that, but like, man, just like I would try to sing, but you don't want me doing any of those things. You just want me like nodding my head and tapping my toe, like, you know what I'm saying, lifting my hands. That's what you want me doing. But they are incredible, and so these moments where we gather together, there's great worship. Our pastoral staff, they're great communicators, great teachers, and I love to hear from every one of them. In fact, this last week, as we went through the values in 21 Days of Prayer, we really heard from every one of our pastoral staff, well, for the most part, almost all of them, and as we heard, man, every moment was meaningful for me. I loved everyone. I loved the different perspective. I loved the different insight that came from each one of our pastors as they shared. And so these environments are great. The other thing about this environment, and this is going to be a little bit of a plug for you, is that this is a great place to invite people to. It's very welcoming. It's very warm. You know, there's coffee. There's always good pastries and things like that are there. And we really want to make it inviting and warm so that you can bring somebody with you. And there's no greater time to bring somebody with you than on September 16th. It's National Back to Church Sunday. We're going to be having 2 great services on that day. It's all designed with you bringing your friends in mind, your family members, your coworkers. We're gonna talk a lot about that next week. We're gonna have some cards available for you to invite people. We just want to really encourage people to come back to church. But these environments are built with your friends in mind. They're built with your family members in mind so that they can come and they can experience the same joy that we have in Christ. And so it's an environment where we, all of us, become inviters, and we invite people, and we take the opportunity to really invite people. Now, let me just say something about inviting. And I don't want to be on this too long because we'll talk more about this next week. But let me just say this thing about inviting. We have a value here at Junction Community Church that we call invest and invite. And the idea about invest and invite is that, here's the thing, you're already, God bless you, you're already investing in people's lives. You're already doing it. Like, you're already doing that. Like, you interact with people in your work environment. You interact with people in your children's school environment, maybe in as a coach in the community. I mean, there's a ton of ways that you are already investing in people's lives. And the only thing that you have to add to that is an invitation to join you in church, an invitation to become a Christ follower. But a lot of times the easiest way to do that is not through like, man, I'm going to give you a 10-point teaching on what it is to follow Jesus. Because then we just disqualify ourselves. We're like, first of all, I don't even know 10 points on that. And second of all, like, I don't know enough Bible, and so I'm not going to share with anybody. Here's the thing. Just invite them. Would you come with me at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning? Would you come join me for just an hour and 5 minutes of your time? Would you just come and spend with me at Junction Community Church? I'm telling you, it'll be great for you. And it's just that simple. But again, you're already making the investment, and I challenge you to make the invitation. Because people will respond when we've invested in their lives. Here's how they don't respond. Random person in the street, you need to come to church with me because you're going to hell. They look at you like you crazy, and you are in that moment. But when you're investing in their lives, when you're doing life with them, and then you say, hey, by the way, would you come join me? Would you want to join me? They're like, yeah, they'll give it a try. And so September 16th is a great opportunity to have that happen in this large group setting. Small group setting. How do we make that happen? Where does that interface with us as a church? Because at Junction Community Church, we actually keep it really simple. We live out the small group experience in what I would call 2 things. Number 1, life-giving small groups and difference-making service teams. Life-giving small groups and difference-making service teams, those 2 areas. Because ultimately, like, we've got to go from the large group setting to the small group setting. And that happens best in those 2 areas, in a life-giving small group and then in a difference-making service team where we give ourselves in service. And those 2 things are really where we experience the small group value in our lives. And so as a family, as we begin to close this out today, we are a family of faith. And it's imperative that we journey together to experience all that God has in store for us, both individually and collectively. We're a family. Man, whether you claim me or not, I'm your family member. I hope that you'll claim me, you know. It's like, oh, that's my uncle over there, but, you know, nobody really claims him, you know. He's a little crazy. And claim, we're family. And so if we're going to experience all that God has in store for us, individually and collectively, in the context of community, we've got to have these large group gatherings, but then we have to move in to a small group gathering. And that, again, is either in a small group environment where we're teaching or talking or discussing, or it's a small group environment where we're serving on one of the dream team teams here at Junction Community Church. There's lots of great teams to serve on. And so next week, we're going to have a small group directory available. And that small group directory will kind of point you to a number of groups that are going to be taking place starting in the month of September. I want you to have those. That we kick off the first Sunday of the month. I want you to have that material in front of you. But here's the thing. I'm going to encourage you. You can get it faster. You can get that information faster. Here's how you do it. You go to the church's website. The easiest way to get to the church's website is simply this: junctioncommunity.church. That's the easiest way to get to it. Junctioncommunity.church. If you type that in, junctioncommunity.church, it'll bring you to the church's website. And then on that front homepage, there's going to be a link there called Small Groups. All you have to do is click that link. When you click that link, it's going to take you to a page of small groups. In the right-hand side of that page, there's a searchable group widget there. And what you can actually do is you can see some of the small groups that are happening. You can go and you can realize, hey, there's this small group or there's that small group. And here's the better thing. You can actually make contact with the group leader right there directly. You can email them. And then that way, that if you have questions or you want to know more about the group, or maybe the group doesn't have enough information for you, ask. That's what it's there for. We want you to connect with people. We want you to be a part of a small group. And if you have questions, it's okay to ask. So bother them, bug them, email them this week, and let them know, hey, what's going on with your group? I would like to be a part of it, or I have some questions about it to see if it is for me. So those small groups are really, really where we see some great things happen. Now, in the idea of not just the small group gathering, but the service teams, if you want to know more about that, I'm going to encourage you, if you've never gone through JCC's Growth Track, I'm going to encourage you to sign up today for Growth Track. That's going to happen on September 15th from 8:45 to 1 o'clock. There's free breakfast and lunch and childcare, and it's a great opportunity to learn more about not only service teams, but small groups and really just the church in general. So I would encourage you to sign up for that. But again, ahead of Growth Track, ahead of the group starting, jump on the website this week and get a little bit more information about small groups. And here's my prayer. My prayer for you, my prayer for every one of us, is that over the coming months that we would not only value this large group gathering, but that we would absolutely value the small group context. And that for the next couple of months, as we engage in this new semester of small groups, we would spend time in some type of group, whether it be a specific small group or even a service team. But here's the thing, because out of those small groups, out of those service teams, there is so much value. We grow, we are developed. In fact, I call it a place to connect, a place to protect, and a place to grow. Like it's a place where we find connection. Now, I know that the early service, the 9 o'clock service, like, you know, it's a little bit more intimate. Like, we all know each other here. And so it's a little bit, you know, if you see somebody new, you're like, hey. If you see somebody you haven't seen in a while, you know them by name, you talk to them. But, you know, the truth is as the church continues to grow, there's more and more people that I don't know. In fact, not only do I not know them, but I mess up names. I'm like, in fact, in the second service today, we're going to be dedicating children. I'm excited about that. And as we dedicate children, there's a couple that's having their little baby girl. Her name's Ava. She's going to be dedicated. And, man, I've been messing up her name, the parent's name. And so, like, all week I've been like, okay, it's Mariana and Arnold and Ava. Okay, I think I got it right. I'm not sure. But my wife knows, and so if not, she'll get me straight. You know what I'm saying? And but the bottom line is this, is that we, in context of community, in context of what God is doing in here, like, there's a lot that we get to know each other here. But as the church grows, there's a lot of people we don't know. But when you're in a small group, everybody knows. It's like, that's Paul. I'm seeing eyeball to eyeball with him. I know what's going on in his life. That's Chris. I know what's going on with Chris's life. That's Kelly. I know what's going on in her life. And I love doing life with them. And we journey together because we're in this small group context. Like, we're not forgotten when we're in a small group. In the large group setting, it's like, man, I haven't seen that person for a while. You know anything about that? And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, man, time goes by. But in the small group, we notice. So I encourage you to get connected. I'll leave you with this takeaway today. Life is better when routinely done together. Life is better when routinely done together. You see, the best that life has to offer is when we do it together. It's not alone. It's not in isolation. In fact, the greatest breakdown to any relationship is isolation. In your marriage, the greatest breakdown to your marriage is when the enemy can isolate you from your spouse. That's when he wins. Because when you're away from your spouse, you start to think, well, he said, and maybe he thought, or she said, and maybe she thought, or she did, and all this stuff starts to happen, and none of it's real, but when you're isolated, you start to think it. And if you just break the isolation and come together, there's breakthrough in that. And so life is better when routinely done together. It's not only in the large group setting that we experience community, but it's in the small group environment. There are some great opportunities for you to get connected in the coming weeks. Would you stand with me? As we have this in mind, we're going to close out with some worship today. Just for a brief moment here, we're going to worship again. And then we'll have some few final announcements and things to cover. But let's just worship together for a moment. And here's what I want you to pray through as you worship today. God, where do I need to grow in the context of community? Where do I need to grow? Where do I need to develop? How do I need to continue to move forward in either the large group gathering or maybe more specifically, the small group context? Let's worship for a moment.